With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Lamed Zayin. We left off on Lamed Zayin, Amud Aleph, 11 lines from the top of the Amud. We are in the heart of the sugya of Shehiyah. We also will mention a bit about Hachazara. So first of all, there's a big machlokes between Hananya and the Chachamim. And as we'll see today, the Chachamim refers both to Rav Meir and to Rabbi Yehuda. The Shita, the lenient opinion of Hananya is Kol Shehu Kamaichul Ben Drusoi, that if foods are cooked already to the level of Maichul Ben Drusoi, L'Rashi, that means a third cooked. L'Rambam, that means half cooked. Says Hananya Muter L'Shoisoi Al Gaba Akira, there's no problem leaving that food directly on the fire. We do not need to have what's called in the Mishnah Garuf V'Katum, which translates to today, you don't need a blech. Why would you b'chlal need a blech? The primary reason is because if you're not going to do something that will remind you that today is Shabbos, you might accidentally, when you walk by the stove, when you walk by the oven, shema yechate begecholim, you might stoke the coals, creating more fire. This is not a cooking issue. This is a havara. This is a kindling issue. Okay. Now, when we keep on repeating, I said yesterday that we paskin like Hananya. I just want to make a little bit of a correction to that. That Amah paskins like Hananya. That Amah says that no hagu ha'am lo hakil. But the Machaber, for the record, the Machaber brings both opinions. The Chachamim hold that even if the food prior to Shabbos doesn't mean prior to Lichbenchen. Prior to Shabbos means prior to Shabbos. Even if the food already reached the level of Maichul Ben Drusoi, or even more, you have to put a blech. Now, a couple of details. First of all, Rav Shlomo Zalman is very strong in saying that when people put a blech on the stovetop before Shabbos, they have to be very careful not to manipulate the knobs when the blech is on top of it. Because think about it, what's the whole reason why you put on a blech? It's to remind you not to stoke the coals. Stoking the coals today means you might turn the knob of the fire up or down. So if you're going to get used to turning the knob, even though there is a blech, even while it's in a blech, how is it going to be a reminder? Is it even Erev Shabbos? Once you put the blech, if you want to change the temperature of the fire, really move the blech a lot. So never move the knobs while it's on the blech. Another very important machlokes from our generation, Rav Moshe, right? He's the one that maintains that the main blech is to cover the fire. Even though you can argue, if it's all about Shema Yechate B'Kecholim, that's the ikar reason, so you should have to cover the knobs. Rav Moshe says it's better L'Chatchila cover the knobs. But as long as the fire is covered, then you're good. Other contemporary poskim, Manush said the opposite. They said that the ikar blech is to cover the knobs. If the knobs are not covered, you don't have a blech. Even better to cover the fire as well. Anyway, it's the minig Yisrael nowadays, like Bechlal Rav Moshe was our posik over here, that we follow Shitos Rav Moshe. We cover the fire, and if you could, make sure that your blech is bent in the front, so it's going to get to cover the knobs. Now, there are different ways of learning all sugyas. We're going to follow the approach that the primary reason for the need of garu v'katam of a blech is, like we're saying, is because if you won't do something on top of the fire, then shema yechata v'gecholim, you might stoke, you might hire, you might turn the knob. The other big topic that we're learning about, that's going to be bigger than tomorrow's stuff, which is the topic of when things were on the fire and on Shabbos you remove it. There are many conditions that must be met for you to be allowed to put it back, returning food on fire, right? Chazara or hachzara, just to know that we're going to follow the approach that why is that? Why are we restricting it? Because mechze kemavashal. Because whenever you put a pot of food on the fire on Shabbos, the primary issue is, again, mechze kemavashal, and this is very important. If the primary issue is shema yechat, if the primary issue is mechze kemavashal, and again, there's not enough time learning a daf over here in 1 hour, but that's going to be the approach that we're going to take. Now, we're going to have a couple of questions. First of all, as we began yesterday, we want to know whose opinion is our Mishnah following. So first, we're going to come to a certain, in conclusion, we're going to attempt one way, we're going to attempt the other way, and besoif, we won't come to a consensus. It will remain undecided whose opinion our Mishnah is following, which means that there's two very different ways of learning Pshat in our Mishnah. there's going to be questions. What happens if you have a stovetop, a kira, which was not garuf and katum? Can you place a pot on its side? Don't forget, these were earthenware types of ovens, stovetops. So the walls are very warm. So we have been speaking about putting something on top or in. What about putting it on its side? That will be one topic. And another big topic in Daf Lamed Zayin is like this. The Chachamim argue with Hananya. Michael ben Derusoi is not enough. Now let me go to the other extreme. What happens, l'chachamim, if the food is fully cooked? Not only is it fully cooked, but it remaining on the fire is detrimental to the food. B'chlal, when things remain on fire, b'chlal, it's mitztamik. Mitztamik means it condenses because the heat removes the water. So what appears to be more starts looking less. People want more, not less. However, like cholent, even though it's mitztamik, even though it condenses, but certain foods, the longer it remains on the fire, the more tasty it becomes. That's called mitztamik v'yafaloi. Now, there are certain foods that they reach the point that not only are they getting condensed when they remain on the fire, but varaloi, it's not going to get tastier. There's nothing positive with it remaining on the fire, and therefore there's certainly nothing positive that were to happen if the fire were to become bigger. In such a case, even l'chachamim, when it's fully cooked before Shabbos, not before Lich mentioned, before real Shabbos, and it's to the point where mitztamik viraloi, you don't need a blach. That's for sure. The big question we're going to have today on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis is l'chachamim, if before Shabbos, it's not only Kameichel ben Derusoi, it's fully cooked. It's fully cooked. But if it's going to remain on the fire, even though it's going to condense, but it's going to become tastier, do you have to have a blech? Or l'chachamim, since it's fully cooked, even though mitztamik v'yafaloi, people are not going to stoke the flames because again, even though v'yafaloi, but mitztamik, that's going to be the other big topic on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. Let's begin on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. We left off 11 lines from the top of the Amud. Once the Gemara explained how this Mishnah could be learned both like Hanania and like the Chachamim. So we're trying, again, the ideal will be that's the way the Ashkenazim learn. We pass like the Ramah. The Ramah says we pass like Hanania. That's the way. So we want for the Mishnah to fit like Hanania. We couldn't prove one way or the other. So Tashema, let's attempt to prove it further. Guys, it's going to be a little bit, you got to put on your seatbelts or your thinking hat because this Gemara is uah. Tashema do Amar Rab Chelboy in the name of Rab Chama Bar Guri in the name of Rab. That our Mishnah, no, he didn't say what part of our Mishnah, but our Mishnah, Loishanu El Al Gabon, Rav is certainly referring to the leniency in our Mishnah, that when can you be lenient regarding placing food? Is only when you're placing it on the top, meaning on the rim. But if you want to place the food inside the kita, like we explained yesterday, the kita wasn't only a stovetop. People would place food on top, which was relatively cooler, or they would have the option of placing the food inside of it. There it was hotter. The leniency that we spoke about doesn't exist. You may not place it inside of it. Now, placing it on top or placing it inside, the difference, just as a rule, it doesn't change the Shema Yachata fear, but it changes the Mexican Mabasha. Just to be aware of that concept. Now, what is he told? What leniency is Rab limiting? So now the Gemara says like this: if the whole shot in the Mishnah is like we learned yesterday, the Mishnah is following Hanania, the Mishnah is only discussing returning things to the fire. As far as Shihiyah is concerned, you don't have to bechol, you don't need Godav and Katum. The Mishnah that's speaking about, you have to rake the coals, you have to cover it with ashes, today you have to put on a blech, that's only in regard to returning something on top of the fire. And Nochamal, guys, we have to remember what we learned yesterday. In other words, according to that, the Mishnah has this mashma clause. That was the word we were looking for yesterday. Mashma means the unspoken, the inferred clause. What's the inferred clause? That Shehiyah is allowed. You don't even need Garuf and Katum. That's a leniency. So on that, it makes sense that comes Rav and says, when are we lenient? Like Hananya. Very nice. You can take and put it on top because it's Kameichel ben Derusoi. But putting it inside is going to be forbidden. I have to mention, why will it be forbidden to put it inside? I'll tell you why. Because we're speaking about putting it prior to Shabbos. If the Mishnah is like Hananya, And the statement of Rav is on the unspoken clause. You know what the problem with putting a pot of food inside the oven prior to Shabbos? I'll tell you, we're going to learn about this in the next chapter. And we spoke about it at least in the Hagdama to the third Pedic. It's called Hatmana. Hatmana. It's a bona fide insulation. Now, as we'll learn in the next Pedic, there is insulating food in something that only maintains the heat. That is something that one may do prior to Shabbos. Insulating the food in something that adds to the heat, which is coals, which is exactly what you have inside the kira, is asar midrabana, gavaldik. So then it fits. But if you're going to learn that our Mishnah does not follow Hanan, our Mishnah follows the Chachamim. The first introductory clause of the Mishnah is not whether you can return it to the fire. No, the introductory clause is whether B'chlal you can leave something on the fire, even though it reached the level of Michael Ben Drusai, and we're speaking about Erev Shabbos, but L'chachamim, you can't do that without Garuf and Katum. L'ashreis Tanan. So if that's the case, and you have to have Garuf and Katum, if you have to have Garuf and Katum, what difference will there be whether you're putting the pot inside the oven, whether you're putting the pot outside the oven? In other words, the Mishnah is speaking about an oven that's garuf and katum. If the coals are raked out, there is no hatmana issue. That's a right. The Mishnah follows Chananya. Says the Gemara, no, it's not a proof. Because me, Savrat, who told you that the statement, right, I'm saying Rav, it's Rab Chalboy, Amar Rav Chama, Barburi, Amar Rav, was regarding the Reisha. Now the Reisha, right, as we said, if it's like the Chachamim, the Reisha is speaking about garuf and katum before Shabbos, the Mishnah can be like the Chachamim. The Reisha can be speaking about Shehiyah before Shabbos. The Reisha can be speaking about Garuf and Katum. But the statement of Rab Chelba is referring to the Sefer. The Sefer clearly does speak about Hachzara, that Beisil Oimim Af Machzidim. And on that, Amar Rab Chelba, Amar Rav Arguri, Amar Rav, Loishanu Ela Al Gaba. When are you allowed to return the food? On Shabbos. On Shabbos, when it's Garuf and Katum, when it's Taka that's on top of it, on the rim of the Kirah. Even when it's garuf and katum, even when there's no coals, putting something inside the kira, since it's very hot, that's the way it works. Because so therefore, there's no raya at all. We can understand the statement of Rab Chama, Amar Rab Chelbay, Amar Rab Chama, Barguri, Amar Rav, regardless which way you learn the Mishnah. Next attentive proof. Tashima. Says in the Braisa, guys, remember this Braisa because we're going to use it twice in this Amud. The Braisa is speaking about base kirois hamas imois. You have two kirois, and they are built side by side, sister kirois. In other words, they are joined by a common wall, but you have two stovetops. One of them, achas grufa v'ktuma, stovetop A has the blech. The stovetop B, eina grufa ve'eina ketuma. Says the Braisa, that mashin al gabe grufa v'katuma, you can leave the food on top of the one that has the blech, and there's a chiddush. I'll tell you what the chiddush is, because the sister oven contributes to its heat. That's why you might have thought you can't do it. We don't care about that. Elamai, you can't put it on the stovetop. That's not garuf and katum. The ein mashin al she'ena grufa ve'ena katuma. Now, mahin mashin. What could you put on this stovetop that's garuf and katum? Beishamai yoimrim v'loy klum. Wow. Even garuf and katum doesn't help you at all, not even for hot water. Now, by the way, there's a big discussion amongst the Rishonim. Is this version of Shitas Beishamai, which is clearly not like our Mishnah, is it only because there is a sister oven? In other words, because one side is not garuf and katum? Many Rishonim learn out that this girsa, this version of Shitas Beishamai, never allows b'chlal. That's a very chamurdik opinion. And they say that when you have garuf and katum, chamin, yeah, avoloi tafshin. Another detail of this braisa, in other words, what we are learning are the same topics of the Mishnah, but we are having a version of their opinions very unlike our Mishnah. Akar, if the food was removed on Shabbos, now you want to know whether you can return it. According to Rabbi Meir, no one holds you can ever return it. I don't care that the food is cooked. I don't care that you have a blech. I can tell you one thing, Chevna. Nothing that we learn now fits the version of our Mishnah's Misoira of Machlokes Beisham and Bisol. We have no problem with that. But one thing is clear: our Mishnah cannot follow Rav Meir. Our Mishnah has to follow Rabbi Yehuda. But again, as we'll see, that Yehuda is going to prove how to learn Pshat in our Mishnah for it indeed to fit with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, this is the Braisa Beisham Yoimrim. That Chamin, that when you have Garuf and Katum and Shihiyah, we're speaking about leaving. Then you can leave hot water, but you can't leave tafshil. You can't leave food. Again, that when you have garuf and katum, then not only can you leave prior to Shabbos hot water, you can even leave cooked food. Furthermore, says the Braisa, this is Rabbi Yehuda's version of their argument, which should be what our Mishnah is quoting. Also, even though there are scenarios like we just mentioned that you can do shehiyah, but once something is removed off the blech on Shabbos, you may never put back anything, not food, not water. They say, no, mamish, it fits our mission. But hold on, not so quick. Now, if our Mishnah is Lashreis Tanan, if our Mishnah is discussing Shehiyah, not Chananya, our Mishnah in the introductory clause is demanding that even for you to leave something on the stovetop, even though it's Kamaichel ben Drusoi, not so pashit, you have to have the garuf and katum. Then it mamish fits. Then our Mishnah and Rabbi Yehuda's in the Braisa, Rabbi Yehuda's tradition of what the machlokes b'shama and b'silul is fits, like we just mentioned. In other words, our Mishnah, like Rabbi Yehuda, requires gerufa and ketuma even for shehiyah, machayim. But if our Mishnah is speaking about lahachsid, like Hanania. In other words, you have this mashma clause, which is basically saying that if you want to just leave the food prior to Shabbos, you don't have no problems. As long as it reached Kamaichel ben Drusoi, if that would be Pshat in our Mishnah, then our Mishnah cannot fit, not like Rabbi Yehuda, certainly not like Rav Meir. I mean, not like Rav Meir, we know. Now, Rashi goes through all the details. It's kedai to find it. I'm by me. The Rashi is like Mamash in middle of the Amid. Kasha. So if our Mishnah would follow Hananya, it Bechlal cannot go like Rabbi Meir completely. Rav Meir Kashya, Lebei Shammai Bechada, or Lebei Silol Betarta. Read inside Rashi. Rashi spells it out like a Machai. If our Mishnah were to follow Hananya, then it would be a problem. What exactly did Bei Shammai say? Who's quoting Bei Shammai? Zot Rashi. In our Mishnah it says that you could do Shehiyah on Chamen. If our Mishnah is following Hananya, the Mishnah is saying even more. Not only can you leave hot water, Lebei Shammai, you can leave it even though it's not garuf and katum. Min hakotze el hakotze. And here Rabbi Meir is saying that the Shammai holds that even if you have a blech, you can't even leave hot water. It's like mamish doesn't work. And according to Beis Hillel, what's bechada means in ganzen agishloim. Well, the Beis Hillel betarte again, because if our Mishnah would follow Hananya, says Rashi, in our Mishnah, the implied clause is that the Shammai allow for you to do shehiyah like Hananya, if it will be like Hananya, both on Chamin and on Tafshil, even if it's not blech, even if it's not Garuf. And here clearly, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, writes that Garuf, Chamin in, if it's Garuf, you can only put hot water. Tafshil not. And by not Garuf, you can't leave anything. Concerning Chazara, Zot Rashi, Garuf, the Beis Shammai says Machzivin, and here the Braisa says that if Akad L'divrei Hakoil Lo Yachsid doesn't work. So Avada, it's clear, not Ameir. Okay, so then you can argue, say that our Mishnah is Hananya, but our Mishnah will be like the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda in the Braisa, B'machloikes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. It doesn't work. Rabbi Yehuda, even if our Mishnah would be following Rabbi Yehuda, but still the problem is concerning Gruf and Kentumah. Why? Because in our Mishnah, right? In our Mishnah, you said that the first that we're not speaking about Garuf. Beis Shammai allows Chamin, Beis Hillel allows Chamin and Tafshil. If our Mishnah follows Hananya. And here Rabbi Yehuda clearly writes that if it's not Garuf and Katum, you can't leave anything. Doesn't fit. The only way to reconcile L'chora is making our Mishnah like the Chachamim, like Rabbi Yehuda. So again, that would mean that our Mishnah is like Chachamim. Our Mishnah is not speaking about Chazara, our Mishnah is speaking about Shehiyah. Says the Gemara, no, that our Mishnah can be following Chananya. And the topic in the introductory clause of our Mishnah is only about returning. Because as far as leaving food on the fire, we are allowed to leave it. You can leave it without a blech. However, there's going to be a machlokes. The Tana Didan, now, it's not Rav Meir, not a Bechlal. The Tana Didan, so look at Rabbi Yehuda b'chada, but it has to be Upaligala b'chada. So look at Rabbi Yehuda b'chada, what? B'chamin, v'tafshil, that noitlin umachzirin. Noitlin umachzirin means that Beis Shammai allows, right, that you can take it and you can return it. That's the Tana of our Mishnah, clearly. And not only that, Beis Shammai allows no hot water to return, clear. Beis Hillel allows hot water and cooked food. And in the Braisa, Paligale b'chada. 1 second. Where do we disagree with Rabbi Yehuda? The Ilo Tana did don Savar Lasho is Afal Pisha Eino Garo Fukatum, following Hananya. And Rabbi Yehuda in the Braisa holds that even for Shehiyah, you have to have Garo Fukatum, and if not, you may not do Shehiyah. In other words, it's going to be a Chiddush. But I can learn that generally we follow the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah follows Hananya. And yes, there is a third version. What is Shitas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? All Beshitas Hananya. And that's the end of the sugya. Bottom line is that the Gemara has no conclusive proof how to learn Pshat in our Mishnah. And therefore, again, the Machaber brings down both opinions. And the Ramah speaks about how the people are nohagu lohakil. Again, that once, this is important, once liquids reach the level of chamin, just to point out, it's interesting, chamin means heat, because by liquid, it's not about cooked, it's about what temperature is it. The temperature of, so let's go, that's 110 to 120 Fahrenheit. When it comes to food, it's not about the heat or the temperature of the food, it's about, is it cooked? And the halachic definition of cooked is either a third or a half cooked. Once it reaches these levels, the is like, at least by the Ashkenazim, that as far as just leaving it on the fire Friday, it could be done, even though you don't have anything to remind you not to be mechata b'gecholim, even though there's no blood. Okay, now asks the Gemara at the end of the first white line. They asked in the yeshiva, Ma'u lismach ba. Ma'u lismach ba means, can you place a food near the stovetop, near the kira, a kira that's not garuf and cotton? Don't forget that we have been speaking up until now about putting it on the top or putting it in, like we had today from Rab Chelboy. What about putting it outside of it but near it? And they'll explain. That's where you have the issue. So Tashema, again quoting the Braisa we just had, at least part of it. The Braisa says when you have two kiros, Hamasimois, they have two stovetops that are twin. They're twin kiras, meaning they share a common wall, one adjacent to the other, two sister stovetops, and one of them was Garuf and Achas Gruf of Ketuma, Achas Sheni Gruf of Ketuma. Says the Braisa, Mashin Al Gabe Gruf of Ketuma. You can leave food, leave. The Braisa is clearly not following Hananya. You can leave food only on the one that is properly covered, raked, or covered with ashes. And again, like we spoke out, what's the chiddush? Even though heat is entering from the side one. In other words, what was our inquiry? Can you put a pot of food on the side of an answer is yes. Because this Braisa demands Gruf and Ketuma, which is resolved, but the neighboring one is not Gruf and Ketuma, and the pot on one is near the other. Says the Gemara, it's not a proof. Don't forget that the Braisa is speaking about you putting it on the top. And our question was putting it lower down on the ground, and it's a big difference. Says the Gemara, Lav Dafka Raya, Dilma Shana Hasam, in the case of the twin kiras, even the medallia, the Braisa is speaking about putting something higher up. Medallia means it's elevated. Anything that's elevated, right, is more open to the winds that are blowing. So the level of heat is automatically diminished. Shalat Ba'avira. But our inquiry was putting it on the ground. In other words, you have like this box, and you're putting the stovetop outside of it, but on the ground. That might be more problematic. You can't prove it from the Braisa. So Tashema, the Amar Ab Safra, Amar Ab Chia, that if you have a stovetop, a kira, kitama, that you threw ashes on top of it. Now, what happens at times, vinis lapsa, it flares back up. This is all before Shabbos. So you did something that was megala das, that you don't want to manipulate the fire anymore, but it was ineffective. Says Rabbi Avraham that soimchin law, clearly you can place a pot near the kira, umekaymin alel, you can keep food on top of it. And this Bryce is not following Hananya. According to Hananya, there's no problem with Shia. It's following the Chachamim. But you did ketuma, but the ketuma was undone. Doesn't matter. And you can remove and you can replace on Shabbos. So says the Gemara Shmami, no, the only reason why this Braisa allows you to put it near it is because obviously this Braisa holds that it's reflaring up doesn't affect the fact that you covered it. Your covering it remains effective. You revealed you don't want to manipulate the fire. You can return it. You can place it back. So that's why you can also place it on the side, which implies that if you would not have thrown ashes on top of the coals, right? Only ketama in, like ketama, even though all you want to do is place a pot on its side, fakir araya, that it's not permissible. Again, counters the Gemara, it's not approved, because according to your rationale, the Bryce is only speaking about all the same case. The Bryce is speaking about you can remove it and you can replace it. I want you to know that no one disallows the removal of a pot from fire on Shabbos. There's no such an opinion. It's even the debate that we were speaking about, Hananya and the Chachamim, is whether you can leave it. But if you left it, no one holds that you can't remove it. So the Bryce is saying the words noitlin only because ketama. Are you going to think that way? And if you didn't cover it with ashes, then you can't remove it? For sure, that's not pshat. Elama, when the Braisa says the words noitlin, it was to emphasize that machzirin. The point is not that you can remove it, is that you can put it back. Hachinami, the Tana, right? When he's speaking about placing food along the side, really, you can place food on the side of an oven, even if you wouldn't have put ashes. But he's only speaking about placing it on the side as an introduction to the next of Mekayman. For Mekayman, you have to have Ketama. So therefore, there's no Raya. Counters the Gemara, that's not correct. Noitlin umachzirin, you can say that the Braisa mentions Noitlin only as a way of introducing the machzirin, because Noitlin and machzirin is in the same place. So that's why it makes sense that really for Noitlin, you don't need to put ashes. The Braisa wants to tell you that they're about returning it. But to introduce it, you can remove it and return it. But over here, putting a pot on the side of an oven, leaving a pot on top of the oven are two different activities in two different places. One would not be taught as a way of introducing the other. Is in another place. So l'chu'ura, again, it's not a conclusive proof. The Gemara is not saying that this completely knocks it out. But l'chu'ura, the fact that the Braisa only speaks about a case where you covered it with ashes would imply l'chu'ura that without covering it with ashes, you may not even put it on the side. It's not enough of a conclusive proof, because maybe still we only spoke about the case of Samchin because we want to speak about the case of Mekayman. So the Gemara is asking, okay, do we have a better proof? Mayhavi Allah, so Tashima from another Braisa. It says in the Braisa, Kira Shisiku Begepisobates, that if you have a kira, an oven, and it was warmed up either with pulp, right? That's what we learned yesterday, or with wood. In other words, with items that they are subject to stoking. Stoking would effectively make them have a higher level of fire. Says the Braisa, Soimchin la ve'ein mekaymen ela imkein gerufa ktuma. I mean, it's clear that for you to leave, this Braisa also clearly doesn't follow like Hananya. Because if you want to leave something on top of it, you have to break it, you have to cover the ashes, you got to put in a blech. If you want to leave something on the side, it's not a problem. Clear. Fakert, it's not a problem to put something on the side of the blech. The problem is only putting it on top. Now, let's finish the end of the Braisa. If the coals die down, all before Shabbos. Or or instead of putting ash, you put this fine chaff of flax. Is that as putting on ash? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The kid said, befedish that you can be soymech. Means if you have a fire, you have an oven, guys. Today you have an oven, and you want to put something on the side of the oven. Not a problem. Not a problem. Even if we don't paskin like Hanan, you don't need to put gruf and ketuma. The fact that you put it on the side is keilu enough of a heker that you're not going to go on Shabbos and be machata b'gecholim to make the pot that's on the side even hotter. Okay. Now, like we mentioned above, that the Hananya, you got it, very lenient. The Chachamim hold that if prior to Shabbos the food is not fully cooked, you can only do shehiyah only if you covered it with a blech. Here's the question. That's going to be from here until the end of the daf. It's very good. There is a point, even like Chachamim, that the food is mamish fully cooked. Let me go further. Not only is it fully cooked, but it remaining hot on the stovetop doesn't add any benefit. Adarabah, the longer something is on fire, the more it's with stomach, the more it condenses, it loses volume. So anything that loses because of heat is something that you for sure won't turn the knob. You're not going to stoke the coals. Even l'chachamim, shehiyah is not going to be a problem. The big question will be, what happens if something is fully cooked, but the longer it remains on the fire, even though it's with stomach, even though it condenses, but it becomes tastier. The mushel that we give is cholent. Cholent condenses, the meat condenses, but the longer on the fire, until it's getting burnt. There is an upside. What will be the sheet of the Chachamim? That's the big topic. That's the whole thing. Let's read it inside. The second to last line. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Oishia. Ketama, if you covered the blech then with ashes, and this detail, and v'huv ara, and it flared back up, all before Shabbos. This brayses we're following the Chachamim. Mashin oleh chamen shuchlu kol tzorchan. You are allowed to leave food on the fire that is fully cooked, right? Fully water that's fully hot, cooked food that's fully cooked. In other words, just to make something clear, Rabbi Oishia holds that when you cover the fire with ashes, but the coals somehow flare up, it completely negates the covering of ash. It's as if there's no blech. There's no blech. So the point of Rabbi Oishia is that even though now you don't have a blech, once the food is fully cooked, even like Chachamim, you don't need a blech. It's fully cooked. So the Gemara wants to say, can we prove from Rabbi Oishia, Shmami no, that even when it's take on one hand mitztamik, but on the other hand it's yafaloi, it's mutar? And really, isn't that what he's saying? No, there's one nuance which makes all the difference. Why did he have to speak about you covered it with ashes and then it flared back up? So the Gemara is going to say the opposite. Punkt fakir. What Rabbi Oishia is really saying, he's saying a chumrah. He's saying, first of all, he passes like the Chacham. That Michael ben Drusoi, my friends, you got to put a blecha. You want to leave it on the fire on Friday. Not only that, even if the food is fully cooked, if it remaining on heat makes it tastier, even though it condenses, you also have to have a blech. The only leniency of Rabbi Oishia is that since you put ashes on the fire before Shabbos, it flared back up, but you put ashes. Like we mentioned, putting back ashes is the way that you showed your megala das that you don't want for it to condense. You want the flame to be lower. Putting ashes lowers the fire. So where's the no point for Shani Hasam? Shani Hache, Viketama. Well, if it's considered ketama, what's the issue? No, it's not fully ketama. It did flare back up. So answer clarifies the Gemara. You might have thought that since it flared back up the way we thought on the Havamina, it's as if there's no blach at all. In fact, Rabbi Oishia is machmer. if there's no blech at all, even if it's fully cooked, if it's still mitztamik v'yafalo, you need a blech. Kamash Malon, we take a follow the chachamim. We are machmir b'shitas chachamim mitztamik v'yafalo. You still need a blech, but since you put ashes, even though the ashes were so to say undone by the flames prior to Shabbos, here we can be lenient. Similarly, next statement, Rabbi Yechon. Amar Rabba Bar Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Version 1, B'shitas Rabbi Yochanan. Ketama, you had a stovetop, and you covered the ashes prior to Shabbos with ashes. You covered the coals with ashes. That was one of the ways they would put on the blech. But it didn't fully function. The coals were so hot that it flared over the ashes. It like burnt out the ashes. Still, says Rabbi Yochanan, very similar to Rabbi Shia, you are allowed to leave on this now unashed hot water, as long as as long as it was heated prior to Shabbos. Similarly, you are allowed to leave even food. And then he adds another nuance: even if the coals in the oven are roisem coals. Guys, we had a chazal about speaking lashon hara. One of these, I forgot where it was. Whoever speaks lashon hara, they're going to put coals of roisem in his mouth. Roisem is a coal that it's so hot. When it gets hot, you can't really put it out. So the only nuance that he added was the coals of rice. So here again, the Gemara first of all wants to prove, Shmami, no, does this not prove that Rabbi Yochanan holds that even lachachamim, even though mitztamik v'yafaloi, still you are allowed. And the Gemara gives the same counter. If that would have been Shitas Rabbi Yochanan, he never would have spoken about kitama v'hubara. He would have spoken about a person that just didn't put a blech, that just didn't cover it with ashes. Shani hachid iktami. Here again, the chiddush is that he put a blech. On the other hand, the fires flared up. Why do we need a Rabbi Yochanan? Don't we have it b'shem Rabbi Oishia? I want you to know, sometimes the answer is, well, that's to show you that he agrees with him. But the Gemara is saying something even better, because he added something. Answers the Gemara, Shitas Chachamim, this is very important. Shitas Rabbi Yochanan, B'Shitas Chachamim, that even when it's fully cooked, if it remaining on the fire adds taste, which would mean that there's an upside in you turning up the fire, because you're going to make it tastier, even though it's going to condense, Rabbi Yochanan will be machmer. That's this version, B'Shitas Rabbi Yochanan. And on that, Amar Rav Sheshes, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, I have another version of what Rabbi Yochanan says. Here he doesn't speak about putting, there was no blech. You put no ashes, there's no flare-ups. Stop, you have food that has coals that if you were to stoke them, they would increase in their heat. Says Rabbi Yochanan, Mashin alel chamin, shaloichim kol tzarchan, v'tafshil shalabishul kol tzarchan. Koydem kol, Rabbi Yochanan b'chal paskins like, over here, he paskins like Chananya. In other words, as long as it reaches Kamaichel Ben Derusoi, you don't need a blech. But even like Hanania, that's Shehiyah. When it comes to Chazara, oh God, if you remove that from the fire on Shabbos, then okay. No, it's clearly here Rabbi Yochanan is Bechal following the sheet of Hanania. The first version is that Rabbi Yochanan is so machmir b'divrei chachamim. Not only does it have to be cooked called sarchan, but even if it's going to be the stomach for yafala, you still need to have a blech. Now, says the Gemara that kosavar, obviously, according to this version, it's all based on the Stam Mishnah. It's because masnisen lahachzer tanan that Rabbi Yochanan learned our Mishnah. Let's go back to this inquiry. Like Hanania, is even though the Mishnah in the beginning of the Perek spoke about the need of covering the fire, because the Mishnah was only speaking about returning it on Shabbos. Right? Avolashois, Mashin, Afalpi, She'eno Godov, Be'eno God. Okay. Says the Gemara, this version of Rav Sheshes is superfluous. Why is it superfluous? You're trying to say Rabbi Yochanan was like Machadish. He learned the Mishnah like Hanani. Okay, and so what? L'choira, we have another Mishnah, and Daf Yotes on the days, if you remember, that also implies Stam Mishnah Kechananya. And again, we take a paskan like Hanani. So, why do I need the Rabbi Yochanan? Both statements are already clearly in the Mishnah. Lashois, Tanina here I just want to give you a rule. Normally, Tanya is a braisa, Tan Rabbanan is a braisa. When I was in Cheder, my Rebbe told me that when it ends with an aleph, it's braisa. The last letter of braisa is aleph. So Tanina is aleph. And Tanan is a Mishnah. Sometimes this Tanina is a Mishnah. We learned in the Mishnah Daf Yutes on the base. Close to Friday, right? Friday close to Shabbos, close to nightfall. You may no longer put a bread in the oven. And normally you put the biscuit on top of coals. Only if there's enough time prior to Shabbos for this bread, for this cookie, to have its surface develop a crust, which implies that if you put it enough time for its surface to develop a crust, then you can leave it there. Now, guys, you're leaving it. There's no blech here, and just a crust. It's like a Michael ben Rusoi, but it's not fully baked. This Mishnah already implies, and it's a Stam Mishnah that we follow Hananya. So we know that. Furthermore, Lahachzid, the second statement that Rav Sheshes quoted Rabbi Yechanan saying is also Tanina. That's clearly our Mishnah. No one is debating. That's the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis, the beginning of Perek Kira. That Beisil Loimim Af Machzidin. And the At Kan Loi Kosher Beisil El Begruf Bektuma. Clearly, I mean, the last clause in the Mishnah, when we're speaking about returning, even the lenient opinion is only if the fire is covered, or coals are raked and covered with ashes. So why do we need the Rav Sheshes? Answers the Gemara, for the latter statement, you don't need it. But even when you learn the Mishnah on Daf Yutes Amud Beis, the Mishnah never explicitly said anything about leaving it in the oven without covering the coals with ashes. The Mishnah never said that. Rav Sheshes Namad the Yuka, the Masnisim Komashmalan. Pasha, to speak out clear, not to learn something b'mashmaos, but you have to have an avodah that speaks out the inferred dinam of the Mishnah, which is Emechanami, that from the Mishnah Daf Yutes, and we are going to now learn the Mishnah here, in the beginning of Perek Kira, like Shitas Hananya, that as long as it hit the level of Michael ben Rusoi, Shehiyah will be allowed. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Shmuel, Bar Yehuda, Amar Rav Yechanan. Kira shesikuo begetas ubeitz. Right, if the coals are coals that are subject to stoking, says this version of Shitas Rabbi Yechanan, Mashin Aleh Tafshil, Shebishel Kol Tzarchai. You can only leave on the fire prior to Shabbos, on Friday, foods that were completely cooked, water that's completely hot. But here, Vafilam Etztamik V'Yafaloi. Aha. In other words, Nachat version, Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda holds, number one, Rabbi Yechanan Paskins like the Chachamim, not like Rav Sheshes. Number two, at least the Chachamim were lenient. That once the food is fully cooked, even though it becomes even tastier when it stays longer on the heat, since it's fully cooked, again, the Chachamim are lenient. Okay. Amalei Hahu Midrabanan Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. How can you quote that in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, but Harav and Shmuel, that they both of them say, first of all, they paskin like the Chachamim, and number two, they're machmir. They hold that if it's mitztamik v'yafaloi, it's fully cooked. And not only that, the hotter it gets, the longer on the stove top, the more it condenses. But if it gets tastier, you may not leave it if it's not blecht, if it's not dorf and cotton. So Rav and Shmuel are machmir. How are you quoting Rabbi Yechanan that is lenient? To which the obvious counter is, it's a machlokes amoraim. I don't understand. Amaloi otu leis ano yada. You think I don't know that? I know what Rav and Shmuel holds. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, mitztamik v'yafaloi yosef. I was not quoting Rav. I was not quoting Shmuel. I'm quoting Rabbi Yechanan. Ki kamino lach with Rabbi Yechanan kamino. So you have a bona fide machlokes amoraim. Amar le Rav Ukva mimeshon Rav Ashi. Dovaldig Aton, you who live in Meshon, right? Aton, I'm sorry, you Ravashi, who live near the areas where Rav and Shmuel had their headquarters. So therefore you are bound to the Chomer Dika Psagdin of Rav and Shmuel, as Tosfos points out, that really he's also accepting the Ikar Adin, that the halacha is like this last version of Rabbi Yechanan, that on one hand, we paskin like the Chachamim, but at least if it's fully cooked, even though it's tamik v'yafalo, you don't need a blech. But since you live near the region of Rav and Shmuel, you got to follow the psak din of the Mara da Asra, so you have to be machmer. But Anan means we live in Meshan. Meshan was closer to Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, at the same rule, following the idea that we paskin like the Mara da Asra, we can rely on the lenient opinion of Rabbi Yechanan, lenient Peshitas Chachamim. Amalei Abayel Rabbi Yosef. Final topic of today, which is amazing. Mahu Lashois. What's this question? Can you do Shehiyah? So the last choice was the last line of the Amid has two ways of understanding the sugya. Either the question is he was inquiring whether we paskin like Hananya, whether we don't. In other words, the question is if you don't have a blech, the food is already a third or a half cooked. Can you leave it without a blech or not? Halachic Hananya not. Or Tosfos says maybe not. Maybe they are following the Chachamim. But as we just quoted, even the Shitas Chachamim, we have a new machlokes that we learned today. That you can have food that's cooked, called sarchay. Mitztamik v'yafaloi, do you need a blech? Rav and Shmuel, do you not need a blech? Rabbi Yechanan, that was the question. Both ways will fit in the Gemara. So that's the question again that Abaye asked Rabbi Yosef. So Amalei, so Rabbi Yosef responds to Abaye, Ha, Rav Yehuda, Mashi Leiba'acham. He would leave food on the fire. Okay, let's go with the first version of Tosfos. That means without a blech. And he would do that. And he would eat it on Shabbos. So Amalei, to which Abaye tells to his teacher, Rabbi Yosef, Bar Minei, that Rabbi, don't even quote what Rabbi Yehuda does. Listen to this. Because the Kiva and the Mesukan who Rabbi Yehuda, Rashi says, at least when he was older, Rashi says, Ragol lo'oichsei bulmus. Bulmus, my friends, means seizures. He had some sort of disorder when he got older. And Rashi is explaining that the way you manage these types of seizures is by eating warm, good, sweet food. And now whether this is an illness that put him in danger, there's so many different approaches here amongst the Rishonim, or whether even it's a chayla she'ena mesukin, whichever way you learn, you can't quote from a behavior of a Jew that had an illness that justifies sometimes cooking itself. Don't quote Rabbi Yehuda. Keep it in the mesukin. The literal shot sounds like that he was a chayla she'esh by sakana, and if there was a need, it can be machal Shabbos. So don't quote from Rabbi Yehuda. My question was, leave a lot for people like us. We don't have seizures. So Amalei, so we told them like this, Bisura, let's all learn like the first approach on Tosfos. In Surah, Mashu, they would leave it. How do I know that? Because Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, it goes without saying, Rav Nachman came from Surah. And not only did he come from Surah, but sometimes people are not that big the mitzvahs. He was someone, Marei de Uvda. Marei de Uvda means he was very meticulous in his observance. And nevertheless, Umashalei v'acham. And the other approach would be, don't forget, guys, Rav was the Rav and Surah. We just said above that Menakotza Lakotza. Rav and Shmuel are machmer like the Chachamim. So maybe it's the second approach of Tosfos, whichever way. Omar Ravashi. Ravashi says that I was once standing in front of Rav Huna on Shabbos, and Vishohin lay Kosta Daharsana. They did shehiyah of this type of fish hash, and he ate it. Now, why did he eat it? It's two ways of understanding Shadabim. First of all, he could be lenient. He could hold, on one hand, like the Chachamim, but like Shitas Rabbi Yechanan, that mitztamik v'yafaloi is fine. And this fish was fully cooked before Shabbos, or maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe he was the most mach. The only reason why he allowed for you to have this on the fire without any blech, imishum the kiven the isbei micha, any cooked dish that has flour in it, once it's fully cooked, there is no upside. It doesn't become tastier when it remains longer on the fire. It does not become tastier when you up the temperature of the fire. It's called mitztamik veraloihu. And here, L'Kula Alma, you don't need Gruf and Ktuma. So we don't know how to interpret which way he followed. Amar Rav Nachman says Rav Nachman, Mitztamik, V'yafaloi, also. He's Machmer. Mitztamik, V'raloi, the only case, Muter. And now the Gemara gives a couple of cooking tips, baking tips. Klava the Milsa, this is the rule. Call the first white line. Call the Isbay Micha, anything that has flour in it. Once it's fully ready, this is important. Once it's fully cooked, mitztamik veraloi, when it stays on the fire even longer, not only does it condense, that's always, but it doesn't become tastier, it gets worse. There's only one exception. Where's tzemach? Lavan mitafshil, the lifta, any dish that has turnips in it, even though you also added flour, the longer it stays on the fire, the tastier it gets. Mitztamik v'yafahuloi. And another detail, that the turnip dish will get better the longer it stays on the fire or tastier, even though it has flour. That's only if it also has meat. But if there's no meat in it, then once it's ready, there's no upside in it remaining longer or hotter. Mitztamik v'rahu. Furthermore, even when it has meat, this is the final very important rule. Let me tell you the downside of mitztamik. You see, my friends, what we are basically saying, again, you can say kamus and echos. Mitztamik v'yafaloi is the big machlokes, what dominates, quantity or quality. Mitztamik means that you're losing the quantity. The food is condensing, but it's worth it because it's going to taste better to the point that you accidentally, without a simon, without a heked, you might turn the flames up. You know when you say that people prefer quality over quantity when you don't have a lot of guests around your table. That's the final clause, which is so gavalik, so practical. Once you have a lot of people around the table, we all have guests. You know what happens when you bring home an additional minion of people? I mean, you're happy. Your wife can get very nervous. There might not be enough food. So in such a scenario, when you have guests, no one wants for the food to get hotter. Because even if it gets better, it's considered halachically mitztamik viraloi because you're losing the mass of the food. That's the final the final qualification. 3 lines on the bottom. If you're not going to have guests, so then there's the concept that even though it condenses, but it becomes tastier. If it becomes tastier, we have this fear that you might, without a blech, turn the knob, making the fire hotter. If you want to have gas, then the rule is mitztamik v'raloi, because a person wants more food when more people are eating around the table. It doesn't bother them that the food won't be even tastier. It's good enough. And the final items, lafta chevra, are dishes made out of figs. Daisa, any type of cereal made out of the grains. Kamene, any dish that's made out of dates. As a rule, mitztamik v'ralohem, that's the rule. That once it's fully cooked, no benefit for it remaining on the fire. And therefore, even if you're going to follow the most stringent opinion of our topic of Shehiyah, that's the bottom line. Even if you're going to follow like the Chachamim, and even if you're going to follow that Lev Chachamim, mitztamik v'yafalo, you need a blech. For here, you don't need a blech. And just to say, al pi chasida, something beautiful. The fire is ruchnis. And that's Sumera Asay Toiv or Asay Toiv and Sumera. Like, what's the derech? And the Baal Shem Tov emphasizes that add light. Begin with you have to have both. A person who's only adding good and he's not a little bit dealing with my own Yetzer Hara, that's not good. But when you put something on fire, Torah's fire. So what happens is mitztamik. Mitztamik means that the more you are immersed in the fire of Torah and of Yiddishkeit, the Yetzer Hara becomes condensed. V'yafaloi, and that's really good. That's exactly what we want. Okay, we'll stop over here, and God willing, the next daf will be more about Chazara, which is again this a very halacha l'maisa, beautiful topics concerning Hilchos Shabbos, to be continued. Okay, tomorrow will be in person. God willing.
Koyach.
Good guys.